everyone. I'm excited today. Today kicks off something really big that I've wanted to do for a long time. And it all revolves around kind of like an open source, open sharing platform, which is why I created the insurance think tank. I got really tired of agents having to pay, a cost for asking questions, right? A lot of these other groups won't allow you to talk about certain types of aspects like social media marketing and things like that unless you belong to their subscribers only group. So I really wanted to build an open content source library built by top agents around the country where you can come in there and you can learn from one another. I've had new agents teach me a lot of awesome things, especially around technology or tactics when they learn from other sales industries. So I wanted to build a community of very professional, right? So I hate negativity in the insurance think tank. It's all positivity, right? Professional people who can share ideas. And to kick it off, I wanted to share my ideas and strategies at a high level about internet leads, because that's how I built my successful agency. As I started off with internet leads. I do a ton of direct mail now, but I want to show you how with internet leads, you can build a successful agency. Now, first things first, internet leads are not fun to work. They're actually one of the lowest consumer intent type of leads. So just know that going in, and I'm going to teach you how I went through all the pitfalls and went through how to build and scale my agency using internet leads. So first and foremost, what I want to do is let's think of internet leads and your sales funnel. So you have all of these different leads coming in to your sales funnel, and these leads can come from a multiple of sources. And what I would recommend doing is start out with 2 or 3 internet lead companies. You have the big ones. I would start with them. And the reason why I'd start with them is they can promise and deliver most of the time, depending on your location, on demand. But here's a big caveat, and that they don't want me to tell you, I'm sure. But internet lead companies really drive traffic in specific geo regions where they're able to spend their marketing dollars and drive their own traffic. Those are the best types of leads because they're in control. There's also a secondary market where these lead aggregators will actually buy leads from other aggregators, and those leads are terrible. Also, just be aware that these leads can be generated through all sorts of clickbait, asking people on social media or getting them to entice them to sign up for something. There's a whole secondary market that there's these lead aggregators who sell to these bigger aggregators. And they're not good quality people raising their hands. So if you just accept that, know that going in, it should be someone though that kind of raised their hand, right? Maybe they were doing a home loan and they said, yes, they clicked the box that said, yes, I'm interested in a home quote. Boom, a lead aggregator is going to sell that data as a home insurance lead. Or maybe someone was buying a car online at Carvana and they go, oh yes, I'd like an insurance quote on this car that I'm looking at. Boom, Carvana sells that lead to EverQuote or whatever. Now, again, I'm not sure if Carvana and EverQuote work together. I'm just giving you an example of how these leads can be generated. And it's not necessarily the best way, which is what I recommend if a lead provider offers it, which is your SEO, search engine optimization generated leads, because those people are the ones who went in and actually typed in auto insurance quote. And then they went through the lead aggregators, click advertising on Google or whatever search platform, or they went through a banner ad and they filled out the contact information directly with the aggregator. Those are going to be your highest quality leads. But at the same time, you have to recognize that these leads are being blown up. And so you have your lead funnel set up. What I see a lot of problems happen. The biggest problems that I see happen with how agents set up their funnel in their own office is they don't consider the actions that are going to happen right when that lead hits the funnel. So let me show you what I mean. So the lead comes into the funnel, and then I want you to think of every interaction in your office as an assembly line, okay? If you break down the interactions in your office as a type of assembly line, then you'll be able to compartmentalize each interaction that happens within your system and you can figure out where to make improvements and where your real costs are and bottlenecks in your assembly line to just continue increasing your efficiency with internet leads. Because again, with internet leads, if you don't have things like automation, if you don't have a good way to follow up, or if you're not following up the most valuable, most likely to close ones, you're going to be wasting a ton of time. And the more time it takes with higher volume things, the faster you feel the law of diminishing returns, which is you're taking in too much, you can't manage it. So let me show you how my assembly line works personally. In my office, we have the very first thing that kicks off is an SMS automation and an email. Okay, so a brand new lead comes in from one of those 2 or 3 sources. Personally, those sources for me, EverQuote, Quote Wizard, All Web Leads, Hometown Quotes, Smart Financial, it doesn't matter. I want you to pick 2 or 3, never 1, okay? The reason why you'd never pick 1 of those is because I want you to check, we're in 3 months, you're gonna check which lead aggregators gave you the best results, and I'm gonna go through those results and what I look at and look for, so stay tuned. And how do you then fire a lead aggregator and go with somebody else? Because again, we go back to geo reporting. Are they generating good traffic in my area? And that's going to differ between the entire United States. I've never found a lead aggregator that generates their own traffic throughout the whole US in a very good way, right? So pick 2 or 3 lead aggregators, get them to start sending you leads into your smart lead management system. And that lead management system needs to fire off an SMS and an email, and then you need to call them as fast as possible. Now, the biggest takeaway I need you to have with this is your automation causing the consumer to react, okay? And when I say react, I'm not saying to call you, because I bet you 99 out of 100 times, they're not going to reach out to you. If anything, they're clamoring off, they're blocking any phone numbers that are coming in, they're freaking out because Geico and Progressive blew them up before you could even dream about getting a hold of them, right? So what I want you to do is you want to elicit them to give you a reaction. And the best way that we have found is that first text message needs to be extremely simple. And we like to use something like, hey, I just received your information. This is Todd McLean with your local farmers agency. How would you prefer I send you that quote, by text or by email? So you notice I told them who I was, that I'm working on the quote they requested, and how would you like to receive your quote? Did I ask them at that point to do anything complex? No. Did I ask them a yes or no question? Absolutely not. It's the worst thing you could do. But what I did ask them is, hey, you ordered something from me. What's the easiest communication method for you, email or text? And the reason why we do that is because I want them to talk to me. If they talk to you, now they're going to feel guilty if you send them another message and they don't respond, right? So it's kind of, you want to use that initial outbound SMS to just get them to talk to you. It also does a lot of other things in your assembly line, like validate that they're an actual person who is actually interested in the quote. Because those people who aren't communicating with you, you've never talked to them, they've never emailed you back, they've never texted you back, those people down the line, 14 days later, we're going to stick into an X date campaign, and maybe if their information is correct, we'll get them on their next renewal. But that's the big factor on when you start working these internet leads, is getting them to talk to you, right? Now, the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to make the phone call, and I get a lot of people asking me, how many phone calls do you make? What's your cadence on these calls? And I want to tell you that there's no magic sauce to calling them on the 1st, 3rd, 7th, 14th day. It's only good if you have a new employee who you just want them to sit down and do something in a specific order so they don't have to think about it, right? That's the real reason why I think that many of you like to do that. In my office, I teach my agents that when we get that new lead, we're going to call them immediately. And then there's going to be a marketer and the marketer is going to make that initial phone call. Now, some offices can't, you're just not at the size to be able to have both a producer and a marketer. So they might be the same person, right? So in my office, I found that to increase my volume of internet leads, I had to have a marketer specifically who made all the outbound calls to these lukewarm leads, right? They're not warm leads. They're somebody who might have raised their hand online. And I don't really want my producer working on unvalidated leads, okay? So, but again, when I was starting out brand new, I actually made all the calls. And then I had a marketer take over. Then I hired a producer, right? Or I moved the marketer to a producer. So there's all ways you can think about it, but think about it in, I need somebody who's not my highest expense ratio doing all of the initial outbound reaches, plus this is going to be data validation. Data validation. Now, again, going back to, I want my producers working validated leads. These marketers are going to get the person on the phone, and if they don't, because most internet leads don't have all the information, right? It's usually just the main person who filled it out with maybe some vehicles. Very rarely do you ever get all the drivers and all the vehicles. Typically, I found that's more SEO generated traffic or reselling of leads by other carriers who couldn't close the quote. So I want that marketer to get them on the phone, gather that information and that data, and then hand that lead off to a producer. So that's if they answered the phone, right? So we have data validation, and then we have a producer who's going to work that lead and try to make that sell. That's if they answer. Now, what happens if they don't answer? So I'm going to put no answer, NA, in this scenario. So if they don't answer, then we are going to send them another text message the next day. Okay, so that next text message, another text in one day. And let me explain what that text is. It's the same strategy, but simpler than the day before. It's going to say, hi, Mr. or Miss So-and-so. I've finished the quote for you. How would you prefer, or when would be a good time for us to talk today about that? And so what that does for you, it's almost like a guilt trip if you say it the right way, or if it's read the right way. Hey, I worked for you. I have finished your quote. When's a good time to talk? And that helps elicit a reaction a lot of times as well. And I liked sending that text at 8 a.m. the next day. And the reason why 8 a.m. is because most people are awake, especially professionals or people that have day jobs. They're usually awake. They're not quite yet at the office. And so they will respond most of the time at an 8 a.m. text, right? You're going to always get those people who might work nights and be pissed off that you text them that. But again, I want my automation to automatically do that second text just like that third one. We're going to keep calling. So we're going to call it. And let me break off how we establish calling. And I get a lot of people who always say, hey, Todd, do you quote this right when you get the lead? Do you have your marketer also quote it? The answer is yes and no. Okay, so with my marketer, if there's no answer, then we're going to pull reports. And what I mean by pulling reports is when we go do a quote in my carrier, I'm able to pull their prior insurance and drivers on the policy, vehicles on the policy. If that data does not match what the lead says, we're going to stop and we're not going to quote, okay? And so we might change that method depending on how fast our quoting process becomes as new technology comes out. But for me, I would prefer not to have my marketers spend 5-15 minutes trying to figure out how to quote the household when the data is not even valid or accurate based on the reports that we pull. What we also look at that moment on is claims. Claims is a huge deal with internet leads. I would say that just in 2020 alone, my office closed over $500,000 in premium off of internet leads just because a claim fell off within the last 2 years, okay? And so when you think about that, those are people that maybe we didn't get a hold of at all, went back into my pipeline for X-date follow-ups, but then they had a claim fall off and boom, we closed them midterm because a lot of these internet lead shoppers are sick and tired of their rates being increased because of surcharges. And even filtering is never foolproof, right? Most of these lead aggregators say no claims, but they're not pulling the clue report. It's all based on what the consumer is saying, and you're not going to get a refund if they lied. So you might as well make sure you're pulling a loss history report on these leads so that you can steal them midterm down the road when that claim falls off. It's the biggest aspect of internet leads that I like personally, because internet leads to me are a giant piggy bank, right? So we pull reports. That loss history is huge, right? Loss history is huge. And if the lead is validated, and what I mean by validated again is, does it have good data? Then we will quote and send, right? If it's bad data, we won't quote it and we'll just continue calling. I will send out another text message within about 5 days after the lead has come in. But that's it, okay? So word to the wise, I've had some people set up like 10 text messages. That is the best way to get either sued or just we'll put stop all after the third one. Maybe on the fourth one, they'll send stop all, and then you just killed your lead, right? So I want you to be very, very cautious on how you use SMS texting. Very cautious, because to me, that is the easiest way to communicate with these types of consumers who only want to communicate online, right? That's how the lead was generated. This is not a referral, which you would easily call and they'd love to talk to you probably sometimes. But these are people who went online to shop for insurance who don't want to talk to somebody. They wanted to see an emailed quote to them. So make sure that you are communicating with people in the way that they want to, but that you're not abusing that privilege, or you will lose the communication privilege pretty fast. And once you lose that communication privilege, you basically killed your lead, right? So going forward, I would have then I always get people asking me, so how long do you work a lead? I would say that validated leads where we sent a quote, we're gonna call them a lot within a 30-day period, okay? But it's best use of my producer's time. I've had a producer make 40, 50 calls in a 30-day period because the person was really hard to get a hold of, and then they closed a $10,000 premium household. So I would say with validated leads, we stay on top of those, especially if they look good. You know, if they got great rates, they had good discounts, no claims, you know what I'm talking about. So validated ones, yes. If they're not validated, so non-validated, after 14 days, we X-date. So what's really cool is we have a new feature, and I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch, but we have a new feature in Agency MVP coming out hopefully in the next week, if not definitely by the end of the year, called X-date automation, smart X-date automation, where we track and it automatically moves forward their X-date in our system. So it revolves, 45 days before it starts to trigger automation events like texting, emailing, and we're going to build out all the scripting and everything for our users. So all you literally have to do is just click start, add the campaign, and make some edits based on your agency, how you would want it set up. So we use X-date automation on non-validated leads because they're not answering the phone and we don't even know if it's accurate information, right? Especially on bad leads. And what I consider bad leads are really, they don't even own a home. It just depends on what you're really going after. When I say they don't own a home, I'm a captive farmer's agent. So if I can't bundle a home and an auto, I didn't want it in the first place, because when I'm buying leads from these aggregators, I'm going to be buying filtered leads for things like homeowner. I'm going to be looking at are they married or not? And so what I want to do now is, what types of leads should you buy? You really want to focus on, in your area, where are you most competitive? Okay, what is your carrier have the best pricing on? Is it auto? Are you really strong on auto? A good example of this, and I'm going to use farmers as an example just because I know what's going on as a company. But I know in California, you have amazing home rates, but terrible auto rates. So if you have amazing home rates and you're competitive on home, almost all the leads that you buy should be homeowners. You should buy home leads from these aggregators. If and you're in my area, like in Dallas, Texas, I have horrible home rates, but I'm crushing it with auto. So I'm going to make sure that the lead type that I buy is auto. Always lead with the strongest policy type. And that gives you an advantage so that when you are quoting someone, you can send them that initial validated quote if you don't get a hold of them especially. And it's almost like a teaser. Some tips and tricks that you can do on those initial outbound quotes is use higher deductibles. Just make sure that you explain that properly with the person when they call back in, or you get them on the phone to talk to them about the quote eventually. Make sure that you go through that and just, we like to use the excuse, we didn't see your declaration page, we didn't know what you had. I recommend actually, let's move your deductible back to what you had. If you say you have a 1% wind and hail, let's move it, instead of my 2% I quoted you, let's move it back to a 1%. Here's the price. At least they're on the phone with me at that point that I can start selling them, right? But on that initial outbound, you want to try to get the lowest price possible. And a good way to do that is to use deductibles in order for them to be able to call and you get them on the phone to make that sales pitch. We always use a side-by-side proposition, especially when you're comparing bodily injury liability. You can have, $500,000 more in coverage and say, hey, instead of your state minimum right now, we can get you up to $500,000 in coverage. Which check would you rather write? Another check for $500,000, or maybe have to pay an extra $500 out of pocket for your deductible and maybe have a $1,000 deductible. Either way, bodily injury is going to be at use if you get into an at-fault accident. So we're able to use now a sales process with them on the phone, and we lead with trying to get them to call us or us to call them and make the sale. So let's go back to how do I improve my internet leads over time? And so what I want to point out is you need to have a system that has really good reporting on a couple of metrics. So the most important breakdown is going to be a geo zip code breakdown. So your reporting needs to be zip code. Why does it need to be zip code? Because that's how underwriters price at carriers. That's how you buy internet leads. So if you think about it, if you're tracking your zip codes in your data and all the quotes that you're doing, you can start to look at things like how competitive am I for auto or home leads per zip code. So you're going to look at competitiveness. How do you know? How do you know if you're competitive? So in my office, anytime we're doing a quote, we're going to put their current carrier's prices, and then we get that by when we ask them up front for their information. We're going through all the data validation information. We say, hey, how much are you currently being charged by XYZ company? And about 40–50% of the time, they'll tell us. Well, what about that other 50% of the time? When you're doing high volume quoting, that's a lot of data that can be useful. We always ask for that information after we give them their price if they wouldn't tell us up front. And we use a guilt trip tactic. So what we usually say is something to the effect of, hey, now that I told you what our price is, since I'm a small agency, a small business owner in your area, it really helps me to understand how competitive I am against other carriers. So now that I told you my price, do you mind telling me what they're currently charging you per month or for the policy, right? And that gets us an additional 30–40% of competitive data. And now if you're tracking competitiveness per zip code for both auto and home, what you can do now is in our system, we go and pull a quarterly report. And again, this only works if you quote enough volume, because if you've only quoted 5 households in a zip code, you're not really going to get good data. Like, you can't really make intelligent decisions off low volume data. So, but in our report, we pull, and I'll be able to see that maybe in a couple of zip codes that my auto insurance after our last rate increase or rate revision, because again, competitors around you, insurance carriers, there's a lot of them, are constantly doing rate revisions. Some do it twice a year. And so if you think about it, with all these moving competitive pricing models around you, if you're watching it, we just had a, I don't really call it an anomaly, I just call it underwriters who don't know what the hell they're doing, actuaries, I should say. We had a couple of zip codes where we were just crushing it. And I believe it's because a tornado came through the county, missed a couple of zip codes, so our carrier didn't take a rate increase while everyone just blew up the pricing in that area. And so we were able to just really take advantage of low pricing in specific zip codes while everyone else was taking rate. And that's where I focused all of my marketing dollars and funneling my dollars to those zip codes while turning off other zip codes like the ones where the tornado hit. I go, you know what, there's no point, like I'm $500 more on average on auto, I'm $1,000 more on average for home in these two zip codes, but the ones right below it, I'm like $500 less. What are you gonna do, right? But most people don't know to do that because they don't have a system or process set up in which through the assembly line, I'm tracking that data, I'm gathering that data, I have my team getting that information so that I can have smart reporting to then make intelligent buying decisions in my marketing efforts where you don't control pricing, right? So that's the biggest thing. It's really frustrating for us agents and producers. When you quote somebody, you're like, crap, if I was only $1,000 cheaper, I would have sold that. Well, since you don't control pricing, you need to have insights live into where you should be marketing. And most of the time you have, like I know Allstate sends out a report to all their agents saying, hey, here's all your zip codes, here's how we're competing. The big problem with those reports is that it's an aggregated data of all agents quoting in your area, okay? And so your statistics are gonna get really thrown off. Plus, most carriers do not get the competitor's price in order to say how much average savings are you in a specific area, which is really important because if you have a high closing ratio in some zip codes, it might be great, but then you might have some agents who are doing like 10,000 quotes in a zip code and they have like a 0.01% closing ratio. And if you're using a report from a carrier about closing ratios, that just killed the zip code. When in fact, it could have been an amazing zip code. You just had some bozo doing a ton of quotes and closing no one, and it kills all the reports for everybody else. So that's why you need to control your own data, your own assembly line, and your own reports. It allows you to continually improve your processes. Now, I get a lot of people asking me, hey, do you track your ROI? Of course I do. I want to know what my premium sold, right? But what I can tell you is that I'm not so much concerned about my ROI in the first 90 days with internet leads. The biggest number that I'm concerned with up front in the first 90 days is actually lead to quote, right? So how many of these leads that I bought from this lead aggregator, how many of those leads actually went through the quote process and became a prospect? The reason why that's so important is it tells you that they're sending you people that actually raise their hands. And I've had lead aggregators who would send me about a 30 to 40% lead to quote ratio. And I know that sounds really bad if you think, well, shoot, only 30% of them got quotes from you in a 90-day period. It's actually really good. Remember, internet leads suck. So, but I've had others where like 1 out of 100 was able to get a quote. And I could tell that that lead aggregator was sending me people that were tracking clickbait or that people that really weren't raising their hand. Maybe I was buying secondary old leads that I didn't know about. But you can, if you're tracking the lead to quote ratio, then in 90 days, you can then say, okay, I had 2 or 3 lead providers I was buying leads from. My lead to quote ratio for this one lead aggregator is 10%. Goodbye. All the money I was spending there, I'm going to put it into these other 2 aggregators. Now I know what zip codes I should start to gear towards, right? And you just continue to scale from that point. So at this point, I would say that you want to make sure, I get a lot of people saying, you know, when do you make outbound calls, or when do you ask them to call you in this entire process? And I want to go back and reiterate something that's really important. These internet leads, again, only want to communicate most of the time through text. Some want email if they're old school. They say, you know, email me the quote, but you want them to text you to email the quote to them, right? Use texting as a way, as a method to get that communication line open. Once you've opened that line of communication, then always try to get them on the phone, right? You can't, it's very hard, unless you know what they're currently paying right now. It's very hard to close without actually talking to them on the phone. We've had it done a lot of times where we found out how much they were currently paying. And then we were able to send them a quote and beat it. And we didn't even talk to them, and we closed it, right? So I wouldn't recommend that method. But again, these people, you want to do business in the way in which they want to do business. And that's how you're going to have the most success with internet leads. Again, if you enjoyed this presentation, please help us grow our community on the Insurance Think Tank. Invite your insurance agents who are successful, friends, new agents. But the big rule is, I really think of it as karma. If you're going to join the think tank, make sure you're not a lurker. You want to be involved. You want to be respectful and professional, and really come in. If you learn anything, if you gain any golden nuggets of information, please make sure you share your information, post helpful tips, make sure you comment on people's posts, and get ready for a very fun 2021. We actually have a podcast that we're going to create. Its first episode should launch on February 5th. Still out there. We're starting to build out the studio and get everything ready. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, I hope everybody has a great holiday. 2 weeks left in the rest of the year, and make sure you're planning out for 2021. Take it easy.